Hold on to your helmets, you little speed demons. F1 Brake Check is back in action. In today's edition, buckle up as Corey and I discuss the 2024 car launches from Haas, Ferrari, and every team in between. We'll unravel the surprise start of the silly season before we have even turned a wheel in Bahrain, Christian Horner's shocking investigation, and the 2024 rule changes we need to be ready for. Buckle up for a thrill as we play Stump the Pundit, and in our ongoing series of discussions about the characters in F1, we'll talk about the most notable times a driver has wound up on the wrong side of the law. Get ready for lights out because F1 Brake Check is go, go, go.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
All right, welcome back to F1 Brake Check. With me, as always, is my intrepid co-host, Corey Broom. Corey, how are you doing today, sir?
Yeah, real good.
Yeah.
A little tired, but it's been an exciting few weeks or so. And I know we'll talk about this a little bit later in the podcast, but it has been an unbelievable silly season.
Yes.
It's even a thing. It is
Yep.
now.
Absolutely. So Corey seems a little jet lagged right now because Corey's actually coming to us from beautiful London, England, while I am still here in the United States in Dallas, Texas. All right, well, let's jump into the news real quick then. So first of all, let's talk about the 2024 car reveals that we've had up to today. So today is Tuesday, February the 13th, and we have had reveals from Haas, Williams, Sauber, Alpine, V-Carb, still the dumbest freaking name on the grid, Aston Martin, and Ferrari revealed their car today. So let's go ahead and jump into a couple of them. So Corey, have you gotten a chance to watch any of the reveals, or at the very least the teasers that were done on social media and other places?
Yeah. And the Ferrari one, wow.
Yeah, got to tell you, at the very least, the livery this year
Yes.
for Ferrari is just stunning. Because Ferrari just revealed theirs just a little bit ago, I haven't had a chance to dig into some of the technical details on it yet. Starting off at the top, Haas revealed their car in a very sedate manner in doing just a strictly online reveal. We saw that they've made some minor changes to the roll hoop and a couple of changes to the side pods and the air intakes for the radiators. But other than that, about the most striking thing was they went from a predominantly white livery to a predominantly black livery for the coming season. So your thoughts on the Haas reveal?
I'm always a fan of the darker colors. This one, I like it quite a bit. Let's hope that the car's look is close to its performance.
Yes.
And reliability. Not just performance, but reliability, because as we noted a few podcasts ago, the performance is there for 2 laps and then it's gone.
Yeah, 2 laps and a cloud of smoke. So let's move on to the next one. Williams took and released their car in New York City to a lot of fanfare, a unique livery for them. The car that they revealed didn't reveal a lot of changes on the outside, and I have a sneaking suspicion that they still have quite a few bits and pieces that we're probably not going to see until next week at Bahrain. But they did go away from their predominantly white and blue colors of last year to a predominantly black and blue for this year. Although there was one thing that was really noticeable about their car as well as the Alpine in the what is commonly being referred to now as the water slides had a significantly different profile for this year's car. For those who aren't familiar with what's now being referred to as the water slides, current Formula One cars, the way that the side pods are often designed in order to maximize the air that flows around the side pods to the underside of the floor, they'll actually have the inlet on the leading edge of the side pod, which is where the air is drawn into for the radiators and for cooling and everything. And then there's like a channel that comes in underneath and flows down towards the sides of the side pods and then channels air underneath. It's usually a pretty pronounced scallop, for lack of a better term, that runs underneath the inlet into the side pods. And as we saw, last year's Red Bull used those water slides to great effect and was often seen as one of the big advantages that Red Bull had over the rest of their competitors, because by channeling that air in a much more efficient manner along the side of the side pods and then underneath the floor. That kept the car much more stable. So your thoughts on the Williams, Corey?
I was lukewarm on the reveal, honestly. I'm really interested to see what Albon does, if he goes over to Mercedes or if he stays. But as far as the reveal goes, eh,
Yeah,
meh.
very true.
What
So
about you? How do you think?
it was a little underwhelming. I expected, especially with them having it in New York City and everything, and with
Yeah, exactly.
I really expected a lot more fanfare. We'll see. Hopefully that Williams took a big leap forward last year, primarily through the heroics of Alex Albon. But let's see now with a year under his belt and hopefully a little bit more compliant car, hoping that Sargent will be able to take and start fulfilling some of the promise that he showed in flashes in the latter part of last season. Williams has made some pretty bold claims about wanting to get back towards the front end of the grid. On to Sauber. Sauber has dropped the Alfa Romeo moniker. They are now known as Sauber Stake F1. They had probably, without a doubt, the most striking of any of the liveries that have been revealed so far. Whereas Ferrari, I think they did an excellent job with the new, even though they don't use paint anymore. Now they're all now wrapped or raw carbon fiber. But the best paint job so far has been Ferrari, probably followed pretty closely by Aston Martin. It seems to be the trend this year is that a lot of the cars have gone to more of a black, with a couple of exceptions, which we'll get to in just a minute. But they all seem to be going to a much more black centric. Your thoughts on the Alpine?
The Alpine I actually liked quite a bit. It's a departure from what they had before. It'll be interesting.
I think it's very tasteful. I definitely think it's much better than the all pink cars that we saw when BWT was primarily the sponsor back in the Force India days. I think it's right up there with Haas, how tasteful of a job that they've done with the new livery. And I really do like it. Next up, let's talk V-Carb. I know that they're trying to differentiate themselves from Big Brother a little more. The new livery, revealing it in Las Vegas, it was really kind of fitting because I think it's probably one of the most garish, over-the-top liveries of any of the ones that we've seen so far this year. Your thoughts?
I couldn't agree more. Been designed, just if you slap that onto a NASCAR, it would look and fit in NASCAR no problem at all.
So on to Aston Martin. Aston Martin revealed their car yesterday ahead of a shakedown at Silverstone that was scheduled also for Monday. Not a big change in the livery. Still has that beautiful British racing green. According to technical director Dan Fallows, the floor is where they're seeing the biggest change. Unlike Haas and Williams and Ferrari, who have all claimed that there's very few parts that carried over from last year's car, Aston Martin, it says that the AMR 24 is much more of a strong evolution of the very, very good car that Aston Martin had last year in the AMR 23. So your thoughts on it?
I love the traditional British racing green. I can't get enough of that color, honestly. I really like the design. I think it's really classy and really just fits with Aston Martin.
One of the other things that Dan Fallow also pointed out, though, is that there was significant reworking of both the front and rear suspensions on the car. Aston Martin does source their gearboxes from Mercedes as well as their power units. And Mercedes made some changes. They used the gearbox as a stressed member for the suspension components, that there was some significant changes that Mercedes made to the gearboxes, which resulted in some changes made to the rear suspension. And then the front suspension was also heavily modified as well.
It's going to be an exciting year.
Last but not least, unlike last year, Ferrari had almost 500 invited guests and press members, whereas this year, they instead did it in front of a very small, very select group of individuals, and it was primarily a online only reveal, much like Haas did. They showed off the latest livery, which we've already talked about, which we both agree is just absolutely gorgeous. Right. And they also took and showed, in kind of a move befitting of last year, when they were celebrating the win of the Ferrari team at Le Mans for the overall win, they incorporated a very cool driver's suits. They did an amazing job with the driver's suits in the way that they've done it, where it takes and matches up very well with the car. So that's so far our recap of the car launches up to today for 2024. We talked a lot about the liveries and the color schemes and things like that. We touched on a couple of them about the technical changes to them and everything. And next week, once we've had all the cars revealed, we'll dive more into the technical elements of each of the cars and the significant changes that are readily apparent. But for the listeners, comment if you have something to say about the liveries, the technical direction, the car reveals themselves. Do you like the splashy ones like V-Carb did with their reveal, or the more sedate ones like Haas and Ferrari have done? Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. All right, so last but not least, we'll talk about the upcoming launches. So we have Mercedes will reveal their car tomorrow on February 14th, as will McLaren. So we're going to get a two for tomorrow. And then Red Bull will reveal their car on Thursday, February 15th. So we'll also be talking about those cars as well during next week's podcast. Shall we move on to the F1 silly season?
Yes, definitely.
All right, so in a very, very unusual move, right after Corey and I finished recording last week, we got the news that the silly season has already begun before we've even landed in Bahrain for preseason testing. We got the news that Lewis Hamilton has exercised his quote-unquote exit clause from Mercedes, albeit 5 months after signing a 2-year contract extension. He has already exercised his exit clause, and he will be moving to Ferrari for 2025 to partner up with Charles Leclerc. Corey, your thoughts?
Lewis is coming out and saying, this has always been a lifelong dream. This is something I've always wanted to do. And, well, obviously I don't know Lewis at all, and I'm not certainly calling him a liar, but why was he shopping at Red Bull if Ferrari was a lifelong dream? I don't really see that. Maybe it was a lifelong dream, but that's certainly not why he's leaving Mercedes.
No.
I would really see more along the lines of he sees the future of Mercedes and he's like, I'm not ever going to come close to an 8th championship. Let's go somewhere else. And that's probably what brought him to Red Bull and then went over to Ferrari. But what Fred Vassar has done in a small amount of time he's been at Ferrari, I mean, good grief.
Oh, I know.
Is just killing it over there. And he gets Lewis.
Yeah, 7-time world champion. Yeah, 2 things. First of all, Lewis has said that, yes, it was a lifelong dream of his to drive Ferrari, and maybe it has, although I spent a fair amount of time today trying to find anywhere where he might have talked about in the past in an interview or something saying that he would love to drive for Ferrari, and I couldn't find anything. Alonso made a very interesting comment today saying that driving for Ferrari was not Lewis's dream 5 months ago when he signed that extension with Mercedes. Rumor has it that Ferrari is going to pay him a boatload of money. They're backing the truck up for him. But at this point, Lewis is not doing it for the money. Lewis has one singular focus, and that is to win an 8 drivers championship, period, full stop. And I'm like you. I think that he has seen the direction that Mercedes has made with this year's car. And I think he saw the writing on the wall and said that who is going to give me the best chance right now? And that's Ferrari. A couple of other things. Today, during the Ferrari launch, Leclerc was asked about having Lewis as his teammate starting in 2025. And the Italian press tried to make it out that he had been blindsided by it. But Leclerc basically said, no, because these things don't happen overnight. These negotiations take time. I knew that Lewis was going to sign before I signed my contract extension. With that signing of Leclerc, the surprise move by Hamilton, and the long-term contract extension that Lando signed a couple days before Leclerc, and the one that Piastri signed during the season last year, with those drivers being a couple of the only ones that are actually locked up for the coming season, Lewis's surprise move has completely blown the entire driver market completely open. So now it's like everybody is speculating on who's going to go where. So it's like now that Sainz is out at Ferrari, there's news that now he is the number one target for Audi for 2026. So it would be very cool to get him in at 2025 now that he's going to be on the market. Get him into Audi a year ahead of that move. There's talk about, is Mercedes going to go after Ricardo? There's just so much speculation.
The silly season is upon us early,
Mhm.
and it's going to be a very fun one.
Yep. So much like the opposite of the end of the 2023 season, where we saw no changes in the driver lineups
Yeah.
at any team across the board. For the first time in F1 history, we're going to have absolute chaos as the year goes on in 2024. All right, so we have to talk about one other news item that came up after we recorded last week's podcast. The news that Christian Horner is being investigated internally by Red Bull for inappropriate behavior. The speculation has been inappropriate behavior with a female inside the team who has brought forth an allegation. Now, all of that is unsubstantiated, but apparently Horner was questioned by Red Bull management for over 8 hours the other day, and some kind of verdict is supposed to be revealed in the next couple days.
I was reading somewhere that Newey is actually tied to Horner as well. So they have something in the contract together that if Horner leaves, so can Newey. So if Newey leaves and Horner leaves, where does that put Red Bull? It's
Exactly. Exactly.
But
So
again, like you were saying, if he is guilty, then there's no other choice.
no, there's no
No matter
excuse.
what,
And
he's got to
yeah,
go.
yeah, if the allegations are found to be true, then yeah, I firmly believe that no man is an island. All right, so last up on our news items that we're going to blitz through just real quick. We've got a couple of new rule changes for 2024 we need to be aware of for the upcoming season. First off, we're going to talk about the power unit allocations. So last year, each driver was allocated 3 power units for the entire season, which we talked about early on in the season about how much I thought that that was a stupid number, that especially with the more races that have been added to the calendar. So starting 2024, the drivers will now be allocated 4 power units per year before they start receiving penalties, which I still don't think 4 is enough, but I definitely think that it's definitely a step in the right direction. The next one is a rule change, though, that I definitely can get behind. So this is in regard to DRS. The drag reduction system previously was not allowed to be deployed by the drivers during a race until after 2 laps after the start or 2 laps after a safety car period. Now the DRS, they will only have to wait 1 lap before the DRS can be deployed. I think it's another step in the right direction. That's one of the things that I thought that, especially in the last couple of years with the Red Bull dominance, that the delay of that second lap before DRS was enabled oftentimes would allow the front runner an opportunity to get out ahead of that 1 second, just simply because of all the dirty air and the jockeying for positions and things like that behind them. Waiting 2 laps to deploy DRS sometimes would often, by that point, the lead driver, oftentimes Max Verstappen, would already have that 1 second gap required. And at that point, with DRS not being available to take and try to track down the leader, it would usually allow them to take off in the distance. By shortening the DRS deployment time to a single lap now, the last major rule changes in the sprint race weekend schedule. So in 2023, on a sprint race weekend, we would have practice, and then we would have immediately after practice on Friday, we would have qualifying Grand Prix on Sunday. And then Saturday would be the sprint, and you would have qualifying for the sprint in the morning, and you would have the sprint in the afternoon, and then the Grand Prix on Sunday. They're changing that up now just a little bit, where we'll still have a practice on Friday, but now we will have qualifying for the sprint on Friday afternoon. We will have a sprint early in the day on Saturday, and then qualifying for Sunday immediately afterwards. And then, of course, still have the Grand Prix on Sunday. My one thought on the sprint race, I definitely like this better than I did the way that they did it last year. I always thought that only having one practice and then having to set up your car for the Grand Prix qualifying, it wasn't enough. I still don't really particularly care for the way that they're doing the sprints right now. As I've said on this podcast, actually a number of times, I liked it much better in 2022, where the finishing order of the sprint determined your race day starting position, which gave the drivers much more of an incentive to really put the hammer down and try a lot harder during the sprint. Corey, your thoughts on any of the upcoming rule changes?
I really like the new rule changes for the sprint races. Just you and I have talked about this off air, but not having that second day to do setups to understand exactly how the car is going to behave on the track was just too much. Just one practice is just not enough to set up a F1 car. From a fan perspective, we get to see truly the best setup for those cars. For the drivers, they get the best setup so they can make sure that they have the best opportunity to make whatever place that they are in the grid.
All right, then. So now we are on to quiz time. So we are on to Stump the Pundit. This is a new segment that we've been doing for the last couple weeks that we're having a lot of fun with, and we hope that you, the listener, are enjoying it as well. But in this segment, Corey will come up with a question or series of questions, test my knowledge of Formula One. So, Corey, what do you have for me this week?
Okay. So I was thinking more along the lines of drivers. When you think about drivers, you think about who's won championships. Well, instead of saying who's won the most, because I think pretty much anybody, even starting out in F1, could say who's won the most and probably the top 2 or 3 very easy. So instead, I went to the aspect of the top 4 drivers who were the youngest to win a championship, starting at number 4.
Okay, so starting number 4. Okay, so number 4, I'm going to go with Schumacher.
No, actually not.
Really? Okay.
So number 4 is Max Verstappen.
Really?
Surprising. Yeah, I thought he'd be higher up in the chain.
I did too.
He was 24 years and 73 days when he won his first championship in 2021.
Okay, well, that's completely blown my entire thought process out of the water now. So, okay, so Max is at number 4. That's interesting. Wow. Okay. Number 3, I'm going to go with Hamilton.
Close.
When he won his close. Okay.
So number 3 is actually Alonso.
Really? Okay.
24 years and 57 days, whereas Max was 24 years and 73 days.
Okay.
So just edging out Max Verstappen at number 3 is Alonso.
Okay, so number 2 would have to be Hamilton.
Yes.
Okay.
At 23 years and 300 days. So almost 24, but again, edging out Alonso at the number 2 spot.
And then number 1 would be Vettel.
Yes, easy. So Vettel, he won it at 23 years and 133 days old.
We're going to jump into our history section here, where we're going to do an ongoing series of where we've talked about some of the interesting characters and some of the stories that have happened outside of the Formula One race weekends. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about one of the greatest cheaters in the history of Formula One in Flavio Briatore. We talked about some of the other characters and antics that have gone on. So this week, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the 5 F1 drivers. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. These are just the most well-known cases of 5 F1 drivers who ended up on the wrong side of the law. So coming in at number 5 is Jean Alesi. For those who are somewhat newer fans and aren't aware of who Jean Alesi was, Jean Alesi was an Italian racing driver born in France who spent 5 years at Ferrari and spent about a decade in Formula One in total. But he and his son bought a firework in Italy, but they set it off in France and were actually arrested for setting off this firework in France. This actually led him to spending nearly 24 hours in police custody before being released. So it was actually Alesi and his son Giuliano and a friend were arrested in front of a well-known architectural firm in France. It was outside of their offices that this was set off. All right, so coming in at number 4 is, this one was actually kind of shocking to me, the fact that Jos Verstappen, father of Max Verstappen, has actually been arrested a number of times for assault. So there's been a couple of well-known occasions of which he's been accused of assault on various individuals. In 2000, he settled an out of court he was accused of fracturing a person's skull at a karting track in 1998. Then also 8 years later, he was arrested for allegedly assaulting on his then wife, not Max's mother. He was accused of assaulting her. And then he was later arrested again after violating a restraining order, preventing him from coming anywhere near Sophie Kumpen. Finally, in 2012, he was accused of attempted murder against his former girlfriend, but the charges were later dropped. Jos Verstappen, despite siring probably a once-in-a-generational talent in Max Verstappen, turns out to be kind of a dick. Moving on to number 3, we have Adrian Sutil. Adrian Sutil was a journeyman Formula One driver who raced for a number of teams over a 9.5 year stint in Formula One. So between 2008 and 2011, the German driver made nearly 80 starts for Force India and scored points pretty consistently. But during his final year with the team in 2011, he was involved in an incident during the F1 Chinese Grand Prix where one of his former backers, personal sponsors, accused him of assault. Apparently, Sutil smashed a champagne bottle and used the broken shards from the bottle to cut up CEO of Jenny Capital, Eric Lutz, at a local nightclub in Shanghai. The authorities in Shanghai didn't press charges, so Lutz pressed charges against Sutil, which led to Sutil's conviction, earning him an 18-month suspended sentence, and it also led to Sutil losing out on his seat at Force India, which pretty much ended his career in F1. All right, number 2, Bertrand Gachot. Now, Bertrand Gachot's story is kind of a good news, bad news story. So after spending years in junior formula, hoping to get into F1, Gachot finally joined the Onyx team, but lost his seat by the end of the year. So then he was able to land with Eddie Jordan and his fledgling Jordan Grand Prix unit in 1991. So it looked like Gachot's fortunes had finally taken a turn for the better. Looked like he was finally going to get the shot that he really wanted in Formula One. However, by mid-season, he was involved in a criminal case that led to his arrest, which paved the way for Michael Schumacher's debut at the Belgium Grand Prix. Gachot was accused of assaulting a taxi driver and carrying a prohibited weapon, i.e. a gun, during a road rage incident the previous year, and he earned himself an 18-month prison sentence. Now, he did serve some time, but he was later released after serving 2 months, and his sentence was appealed and the charges were dropped. His conviction was overturned on appeal, and he was actually able to return to Jordan F1 for the Japanese Grand Prix of that same year. All right, and so last but not least, we have at number 1, JJ Lehto. JJ Lehto joined the Onyx team as Gachot's replacement, but when the team folded, he was without a drive. And so he spent 3 years out of Formula One, but then was able to return with a short-lived team called Scuderia Italia. And although his performance was kind of okay, he did get injured in an accident in 1993. By the time he had recovered, he had been replaced and pretty much cut his time in the sport short. 15 years later, Lehto was charged with reckless driving, manslaughter, driving under the influence, when he was involved in a boating accident which saw one of his best friends being killed. So Lehto was caught going at nearly 120 kilometers per hour in a restricted zone where his speed was supposed to be limited to 20 kilometers per hour. He was promptly convicted of all charges and received 28 months in prison. However, in 2012, he successfully managed to appeal his conviction and had all the charges against him dropped. But can you imagine you're in an accident, especially in boats? I don't know. I guess boats are one of those things that just personally scare the crap out of me. And it's like, I cannot imagine going 120 kilometers per hour in a boat. Got what he deserved. And then the fact that he was actually able to get the conviction overturned makes me feel bad for the legal system.
travesty of justice, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are our top 5 F1 drivers who ended up on the wrong side of the law. Listeners, if you know of a story that maybe we didn't cover here that you think is really interesting, please leave it in the comments. Let us know. Maybe we can take and cover that in a future episode. You ready to bring it home?
All good.
All right, so another episode of F1 Brake Check has taken the checkered flag. Thank you for listening. We'll be back in a week's time to discuss the latest car launches, news and rumors, and we'll dive into the history of Formula One preseason testing. For Corey, I'm Scott. Let's go.
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher. Also, help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.